Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, leading publishers of books, directories, educational guides and magazines aimed at schools in the UK and beyond. Enjoy the podcast.
Good morning and welcome to the Sunday Social on Teachers Talk Radio. We're just waiting for Yasmin to join now, which she has, so I'll invite Yasmin in to speak. Welcome to the Sunday Social. Today's Sunday Social with Yasmin Omar is why do Somali boys underachieve? And without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Yasmin now.
Hi Tom, thank you so much for handing over to me and thank you also for starting this. So I'm really excited for this show. It's actually my first show of 2023, so a belated Happy New Year everyone. I'm just going to make sure that Omar joins the session, but to just give you a bit of a lowdown, because I know that a lot of people listen to this after the recording finishes. Today's show is going to be about the underachievement of Somali boys and also interviewing a Somali head teacher. I think he's the only one that I'm aware of, and I'm really excited to be interviewing him. So we'll just wait for him to join. But if there's anyone that has any questions today, please make sure that you ask. You're more than welcome to take part in this. I want it to be as interactive as possible, so thank you everyone so far that has joined, and a belated Happy New Year. I'll just say that again. So let's just make sure that Omar gets into this session so that I can start with him. In the meantime, I just wanted to talk a little bit about Somali students, particularly Somali boys. I can see that Bahja is in this session as well. Also, we've got Omar here. Okay, I'm just going to get Omar up as a speaker. So Omar, just accept the request to speak if you can see it. Okay, whilst Omar gets connected, I'm just going to quickly talk a little bit about the background of Somali boys. Okay, so although not a lot of research has been done on Somali students, there are a few generalised studies looking at Somali pupils, particularly Somali boys in inner city London schools, and they seem to always echo the same findings. These findings show that Somali boys across various boroughs are A, the most underachieving ethnic minority group in a lot of London schools, B, in various schools have a gap of up to 50% lower attainment than the top achieving groups, C, have previously been highlighted by Ofsted as an underachieving group, and D, in many schools are highlighted as a key group that form part of whole school improvement plans. So I thought, what better person to get than a Somali head teacher? Omar, can you hear me? Just let me know if you can by unmuting your mic.
Hi, apologies. Yes, I can hear you, Yasmin.
Great,
Hi.
no problem at all. So yeah, Omar, my first question for you: are you the only Somali head teacher that you know of in England?
Yeah, I'm certainly the only one that I'm aware of,
Yeah.
and not to say that there aren't others out there. I'm pretty sure there are, but I just haven't come across them, Yasmin.
Yeah, no, same for me.
Yeah.
Same for me. I've not come across any other Somali head teacher, and when I first heard about you, because we used to work in the same borough, I was honestly so surprised and happy to see that there was a Somali head teacher at a neighbouring school. Honestly, it meant a lot to me as a Somali student growing up. I never had Somali teachers at school, and I know that's also a very similar experience for a lot of the Somali students that I grew up around. Okay, so Omar, the next question I wanted to ask you was if you could introduce yourself. So like, when did you first get into teaching?
Yeah, so thank you first and foremost inviting me to to come on this very important platform, and sort of to talk about this very particular pertinent topic, which we'll get onto I'm sure in a minute. Yeah, if I just introduce myself, so I'm an East End lad, and raised in the East End of London. I've more or less been in East London the majority of my life, apart from my sort of early years where I grew up in the northeast of England, in a place called Middlesbrough, which I'm not sure a lot of people. People will be familiar with, but it had a very small Somali community there. So a lot of the Somali community who may be listening to this may not be aware of. And my parents, in the late 80s, made a very conscious decision to move to London so that they can give myself and my siblings a better opportunity, because it's sort of, in those days in the northeast, there wasn't much of a prospect in terms of jobs, and so they made that decision. We moved down to the East End of London in the late 80s, and I've been here ever since. So and I was a bit of a rebel in school, didn't do really well in school, or as well as I would have liked in school, and but also growing up as someone who was EAL, someone who was black. I didn't really get the support that I needed when I was in school. I can comfortably say that in school, when I was in school, I was actually let down. And whenever I speak, I always talk about my experience as a youngster in school, and how much I wasn't supported when I was in school, and how much I was let down. And that kind of spurred me on to become a teacher. And when I finished university in 2003, I actually didn't know what I wanted to do, but I wanted to do something about education. I wanted to be in education. I didn't know what it was that I wanted to be. At that point, I didn't want to become a teacher. So I rang up my old school. I spoke to one of my science teacher. His name was Mr. Rowland, who was actually the head of computer science at my old school. And I said to him, I think I want to become a teacher. Can I come and spend a couple of days in the school just to get an experience of what it's like being a teacher? And I went there and spent a week in the school, and I really, really enjoyed it. And at that point, I said to myself, I definitely want to become a teacher. I also had at the back of my mind, my experience of being in school, and how much I felt I was let down and not supported and not given the support that I needed in order to develop. So I said to myself, I definitely want to become a teacher, and I want to help youngsters. And yeah, I applied for a PGCE, and the rest is history, and the rest is history. And I definitely made the right choice. One thing that I would have liked when I was in sort of at university, or planning to do teaching and become a teacher, is two things. One, seeing teachers from sort of my background, my community, people that look like me who were teachers, as role models to influence me to become a teacher, and also some really supportive career advice, because when you're 16, 17, 18, 19, you don't know what to do, and if you've got that career advice to say, how about this, or how about what you're talented in, I remember my career advice when I was doing my A levels and planning to go to university was, what do you want to do? And at that age, you need a bit more than that.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out! Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading!
No, Omar, I totally agree with you. And honestly, I love that. I love that, your upbringing kind of shaped why you wanted to go into teaching, because you felt let down at school. I feel like that's a really important thread to pick up on. I know that a lot of the people that will be listening to this can probably relate to that in some way. I know that, it's quite a common experience among Somali students, especially boys, to feel let down in school. And, that is a thread that I will come back to and pick up on. So also, everyone, thank you, everyone that's listening. If you want to ask a question, please just request the mic. You're more than welcome to join in the conversation. You don't even have to ask a question. If you want to share your thoughts, you're more than welcome to jump in at any point. Okay, so Omar, the next question I have for you is, can you tell us where now, which borough in London or which school you're a head teacher at, and also what other roles did you hold in teaching before that?
Yeah, so I mean, I live in Newham, and most of my teaching experience has been, been in schools in Newham. And when I sort of applied for my PGCE, and I did my teaching placements in two schools in Newham, St Bonaventures and Forest Gate Community School, and I really, really enjoyed both experiences. They're both in the same borough, literally half a mile between them, but very, very different schools. And I really enjoyed my experience. I then did my NQT year. In those days, it used to be called NQT. Now it's called ECT at Cumberland School, and in Plaistow. I really enjoyed it, and I was there for a year. And while I was there, a job came up in Forest Gate, which I was a student teacher there the year before, so I applied for it, and I went back to Forest Gate School I think that was in 2008. I started being a teacher of ICT. Now it's computer science. Those days it used to be called ICT. And I really, really love the experience at Forest Gate School. Forest Gate is a school which is very, very close to my heart. I was there for 12 years. Two of my children go there. It's part of our trust that I'm part of. So I stayed there for 12 years, and within the first literally 3 months of being there, I got a promotion. Those days, we operated a house system. And I got a small TLR to organize assemblies and form time, and I really, really enjoyed it. It was a really, really good experience. And then, sort of 6 months after that, I got promoted to a deputy director of a house, the house system that the school had. And again, and that was a lovely experience. And I mean, people were saying to me, like, you work really hard, and I actually didn't think that I did. I just did what was in my sort of DNA, and improving the life chances of the students, making sure my lessons were really well planned, and I was delivering really good lessons. But I was getting recognised. That was the most important thing. I was getting recognised by the senior management in terms of the impact that I was making, and then I did that role for a number of years, and then we had a new head teacher who came in 2011, and he changed the school from a vertical true to group system to a year group, and then I became a head of year or head of learning. That was my role, and I picked up a really, really challenging year group, year nines. And for me, that was the most enjoyable time for me as a head of learning or head of year. I had that year group for 3 years. I took them from year 9 all the way to year 11, and that year, when they finished in 2014, the school got its best ever GCSE results. Those days it was five A to C's, including maths and English, and I think we got like 70%, and that was like unheard of. And for me and for us as a school, that was like the turning point. After that, we became an academy, and the rest was history. And then when I saw that year through in 2014, I was rewarded for my hard work, and I became an assistant head teacher, and I was an assistant head teacher for 3 years, and again, amazing experience. Because for me, even though I found the transition really, really challenging, and it was a memorable time, because rather than sort of being a middle leader and focusing on one particular area of school improvement, I was actually suddenly looking after departments. I was looking after year groups. I was looking after areas that I wasn't familiar with. So the experience that I got was amazing. And then in 2019, sorry, not 2019, 2017. So 2017, I became a deputy head teacher, again in the same school, and I was in charge of safeguarding and pastoral, and that was again another step up, but again another opportunity that I really relished and I really experienced. And then in 2019, our trust grew. We another school, Cumberland Community School, which was a school that I was in NQT many years ago, joined our trust, and I was given the opportunity to become a head teacher there. So I did a full circle, and I rejoined the school that I was an NQT many years ago, and I went there as a head teacher, and for me that was the proudest moment, and actually seeing teachers there who were there at the time, and teachers who we were NQTs together who were there, was really enjoyable, and that was an opportunity to raise standards in that school, because Cumberland was a school that was underachieving, didn't do well. The outcomes for students were really poor, and my mission was to bring that school up and make sure that the students weren't being let down and the students were leaving with really good GCSEs. And I was there for 2.5 years, and this year that's gone. Cumberland got its first ever GCSE grades under sort of our trust and my leadership, and it was the sixth highest performing school in the whole of Newham. And those of you who know Newham's got some really good schools. And in terms of Progress 8 score, Cumberland was number 6 this year. And when I took over in 2019, I think it got the worst or second worst ever GCSE results. So we've had huge impact, in the short term time that we were there. And then another school joined our trust this year in April 2021, and I was asked, based on what I've done in the past and my experience and my track record of turning around underperforming schools, I was asked to go and lead on that school as an executive head teacher. So the school's called Petty Academy. It's in Hackney. And I've been there since April 2022, and whilst I've really enjoyed my experience of being in that school, and for the last sort of 8 months, it's also been really challenging, because what I'm trying to do is trying to bring in the same systems and the same school improvement strategies that's worked in both Cumberland and Forest Gate that I'm familiar with, to raise standards. And it's a big challenge, but it's one that I'm really enjoying and one I'm really relishing.
Omar, honestly, that's really inspiring, and it is really nice to hear about your career from the start right the way up to where you are. I know it is also quite common for teachers to often join schools that they've that, so it's really nice that you were once a trainee in a school, and as part of the same trust have gone on to be a head teacher at 2 of the schools in that trust. It's really good to hear. We've actually got 2 questions that have come in so far from Bahja, who's listening in this show. She wanted to ask you, did you always want to be a head teacher, and do you ever feel imposter syndrome?
Did I? And so the answer to that question is no. I've never considered myself or wanted to be a head teacher, and it's something that I've just got into, and it's something that I've actually been really pushed to do by my CEO Simon Elliott, who I've worked with for 11 years. And he joined while I was at Forest Gate in 2011, and he said to me, I remember him saying to me, Omar, one day I'll see you as a head teacher. And I said to him, Simon, you must be joking, don't be silly. People like me never become head teachers. And I really meant that, because I did firstly, I know, how much energy and work and commitment that you have to put in. Being a head teacher really takes over your life, And as a head teacher, you can't switch off. You're constantly on, on alert if anything happens. I mean, for example, this year in the middle of the summer holidays, we had a fire in our school, and I had to put my summer holidays on hold, and literally for the last 3 weeks of the summer, I had to work on that to try to get the school up and running for the 1st of September. So these things, you've always got at the back of your mind. So it's that responsibility, but it's also the other thing is, to be able to be given that opportunity. I know people out there who are more than capable of being head teachers, being leaders, running big organizations, but the opportunity, being afforded the opportunity is quite rare. For me, I was quite lucky because I worked really hard, and my talent and my hard work was recognized and picked up, and I was also supported, and my CEO Simon Elliott, who is the most incredible person that I've ever worked with and I've ever known, but he's also the most sort of, the fairest, and he understands people, and he plays to people's strengths. And I've tried to mold myself, like he, on his personality, and I'm also trying to give people that opportunity, but I'm also trying to stay humble, and also give something back to my community in East London, Newham, and also the children that I serve, who are under my my leadership. Because for me, when I often go out, as I said, I live in Newham, and I often when I'm out Stratford or Westfield, I often get stopped by students that I've taught 5, 6, 10 years ago, and it makes me really proud when I see them doing really, really well. And when I also think that I've had an impact on their success, it makes me even feel better. So, no, I didn't always want to become a head teacher, but when the opportunity came, I grabbed it with both hands.
Oh, I love that, honestly, Omar. So now I thought it would be great to move into talking a little bit about Somali boys. I remember earlier as well, you did say that, you were a bit of a rebel at school. So, maybe you can give a first-hand account, or even one as your view as, a professional in teaching. But I just thought really quickly, for everyone that's listening, I would share some of the stats on Somalis. So I think the first thing that's important to say is there aren't actually accurate stats on Somalis in the UK for various reasons. We will get into that. But the Office for National Statistics in 2015, so this would have been quite a few years ago, say there are approximately 115,000 Somalis in the UK, and over half of those are thought to be in London. And when I used to work at Ealing Council about half a decade ago, they did also say that it was believed the Somali population made up 0.04% of the population in England. And in terms of stats that are specific to Somali kids, there isn't actually a lot of research. I mentioned this at the start. I'll just say it again, since a lot of people have joined us since. There aren't actually a lot of stats on Somali boys, or there's not a lot of research that's been done. But generally, in the research that has been conducted, a lot of the time, the findings have been that the most underachieving ethnic group, minority group in schools are Somali boys. In various schools, there's a gap of over 50% lower attainment amongst Somali groups when you compare them to the top achieving groups. Somali boys have previously been highlighted by Ofsted as an underachieving group, and in many schools are highlighted as a key group that form part of a whole school improvement plan. I can see that there are loads of teachers that are listening, and also loads of other professionals in other fields that work with Somali kids. So, if anyone at any point wants to jump in and share their thoughts, you're more than welcome to. You can share your own experiences in school, or you can share your experiences as a professional in the working world. So I just wanted to ask you, Omar, what would you say? And this is quite general. I know that, it is a really broad topic, but what would you say are some of the barriers that Somali boys in particular face in schools?
I think I'll come back to Somalis in a minute, but generally, obviously, Somalis fall under the sort of the ethnic minority sort of category, and quite a lot of the ethnic minority children generally face similar issues, and in particular, in my experience of working in Newham and living in Newham, I know one of the biggest issues that children generally, whether they're ethnic minority or not or non-ethnic minority, face is there's issues with with housing. There's issues with children coming from socio-economic background. For me, and those are the biggest issues that generally children face in a borough like Newham or Hackney or Tower Hamlet. And when they're ethnic minority, usually they come from families which are maybe sort of first generation immigrants, and there's a lack of understanding in terms of the education system. I remember when I was growing up, and my parents were illiterate. They didn't speak much English, or they had very limited understanding of the English language and how the education system works. And for them, that I go to school that's it. I mean, they never used to have a conversation with me about how is school, what you learn, what you enjoy, what subjects are you finding difficult. So there was that lack of involvement when it comes to the understanding of the education. And now, sort of fast forward, 30 years, there's other issues. There's issues, for example, one of the biggest issues that we face here in Newham is the issues with overcrowding and housing, and kids not having a proper space to study. I think that is something that as a head teacher that I deal with on a day in, day out basis. You have kids that maybe live in a studio flat, or they live in a hotel, and that really has an effect on them. And we're also going through quite a lot of crisis in terms of the economics and the cost of living, and kids not being able to afford luxuries like access to books or materials, or, for example, extra homework club, or just like basic stuff like food. Those things usually are have a big effect on families in general, and anyone who comes from sort of ethnic minority or families from low socioeconomic background. In terms of Somalis, back in 2009, I think, and when I was doing my research for my master's, I actually did a bit of work around why do Somali children generally underachieve, and at those times I found out quite a few things. One of the things that I found out was the lack of role models, for children, and seeing people that look like them, or people that represent their community, or generally having access to mentoring and getting someone to mentor you and give you experience in terms of what you need, or proper career guidance. That was one of the things that was missing. And although that was then, things are getting better, because even in my school I work with organizations. For example, there's an organization that I work with called the Badu, and what they do is they give children that mentoring and guidance, especially kids who maybe come from a single parent family. And also, in the Somali community, one of the things that I've noticed is that a lot of the children come from single parent families, and that is an issue, because if we're talking about boys in particular, I mean, I've got 3 of them myself, and when they get to sort of 12, 13, 14, they actually need a male role model to talk to guide them, to be in contact with their teachers, to find out how they're doing academically, to sign them up for football, do physical activities. Those things, don't underestimate the impact that, having a father figure at home has, on children in generally, but in particular boys. And so for me, there's a lot of children from the Somali community in particular that I'm aware of that come from single parent families, and that has a detrimental effect on them. Because if a male figure is not there, boys will get into gangs, will get into misdemeanor, will get into undesired things, and that will take them away from their focus of education and doing well and having an aspiration to do well. And I've seen that in the past, a lot of times. In my experience of working with Somali boys, and just going back and rattling in my brain, and I very rarely see boys or girls who get into gangs and fall off track in terms of being focused, if both parents are there and both parents are actively involved in their life. I've seen so many incidents where you've got a mother who's probably got 5 or 6 kids, and Yasmin, a lot of our people from our community have quite a lot of kids, and
Yeah.
it becomes very, very difficult for a mother, bless her, to be able to handle teenagers where maybe the job is easier when you've got maybe 1 or 2, but when you've got 5 or 6, and they've all got different needs and different interests and different things which are competing for their attention and their need. It's very difficult for one person, let alone 2. And so, there are challenges, but I think the socio-economic factors do have a huge impact on the direction that these kids, particular boys, who are very, very energetic, and as I said, I've got 3 of them, and they do take a lot of my time, and to be able to keep them rounded, keep them focused, keep them off trouble, and keep them busy, it does take a huge amount of effort and time.
No, honestly, Omar, there's a lot that you said that I think is really valuable, and that I think a lot of the people that are listening will really relate to. As I said earlier, guys, if there's anyone who wants to jump in at any point to share their views, you're more than welcome to. You can share your own first-hand experiences. You can put a question to Omar. You're more than welcome to do that. I think, Omar, there's a lot what you said there that's really true. Like in Newham, I know that there is a lot of overcrowding, and that a lot of the students can't afford to buy resources or have a quieter space. I remember when I was at school, I think I was the last school year to ever get EMA. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's education maintenance allowance that was given to, I think, children whose parents had below a certain household income. It did really save me. I used to always spend my EMA on all the resources I need, which meant, I was able to keep up with my peers in many ways at school, and did go on to do really well. And I would credit EMA as one of many reasons, as one of many different ways in which I was supported, including by like my mum, etc. But it was something that really helped me, and I have noticed that a lot of the children now have different attitudes to A levels, and not only are the subjects a lot harder now, a lot of the children who are growing up in the same kind of socioeconomic circumstances as I was a decade ago don't have any of the government support that was in place for students like me. And in terms of, Omar, what you said about children getting recruited into gangs, I used to work at Ealing Council, and I came across a lot of Somali boys that were part of things like county lines. I'm sure a lot of people know what county lines is, and it's essentially when a child, or anyone rather, but it affects children a lot, carry drugs or illicit substances on behalf of like a gang, and take them to other areas, other like parts of the country to sell them, etc. And I think what I found a lot of the time was the children that were more likely to get recruited into things like county lines were the children whose time after school was unaccounted for. So how in a lot of schools, safeguarding teams often place a huge importance on calling parents if a child hasn't arrived to school. What basically I found was, if a child was walking home, let's just say they live 10 minutes from their school, so 10-minute walk home. If a child was arriving 45 minutes, an hour later, an hour and a half later, not only a lot of the time were their parents not aware if they'd had a detention, and because if it was so normal, if it was the norm for them to not arrive in those 10 minutes, a lot of the time they could get away with something like an hour's detention, because nobody would be checking where they were in that time. And equally, a lot more dangerous things would be happening. So a lot of the time, I know schools on inset days use things like, chicken shop grooming, where kids go into chicken shops and, someone says, hi, come deal these drugs for me, and like, another part of the country. But what often would happen was, because these children wouldn't be rushing home because nobody would be checking what time they got home, they would then come into contact with people that were actually quite dangerous. So I'm more than happy to talk more about county lines and how that affects Somali boys, as Omar kind of touched on it. But I can see that Miss Sawa has requested to speak. So is there anything you wanted to share with us, Sarah?
Hi, Yasmin. Thank you so much for speak. I think I was just listening to some of the conversation, and I found it really interesting when we speak about the external influences in relation to gangs. But from my own experience, I guess as somebody, I'm closest to the Bangladeshi community, so that's probably where I draw my understanding. And there's a critical lack of attainment with our young Bengali boys as well. But one of the things that I notice is what can only be referred to as like chronic babying that happens in a way that just does not seem to happen with girls. And it's a culture of like excuses and saying, oh, it's okay, and allowing for these young boys to effectively act as men in their households. And from a school's perspective, it's something that I wonder how much influence we can realistically have. So this year I'm responsible for parental engagement, and it's something I see time and time again when I'm having conversations with parents, and I can say, Mrs. X, your son has not submitted homework for 3 months, and I'll have a parent profusely apologizing to me, and I wonder, and then straight away the same thing will happen the following week. And again, of course, it's that lack of accountability at home. But I wonder what we as teachers and as leaders in schools can really do to change that culture, because these boys are, often very well fed, they're very well clothed, whether, obviously there's the gang affiliations and whatnot, but in fact, a lot of them aren't. They are just boys at home, often with PlayStations that have freedom and access to pretty much whatever they want, but there's still a real lack of boundaries. And maybe that's, and I'm speaking for my community as well, so I can't cast aspersions on a different community, but I wonder what we can do as leaders from certain communities to kind of encourage our parents to hold our boys more to account.
Oh, Sarah, thank you so much. That's such a great point, and an amazing question. And I will throw in there, guys. I previously worked with Sarah Sawa, and she's actually my biggest role model in teaching. So, Omar, I'll hand over that question to you to answer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sarah. Is it Sarah?
It is Sarah. Thank you,
Sarah. Sarah, lovely to meet you. Yeah, you've actually raised a really good point. And by the way, the Somali community and the Bangladeshi community face very similar challenges. But but I really like your point about are we mollycoddling our boys too often, and we need to make them more independent, and what can we do as school teachers or school leaders to be able to make sure that they take a bit more responsibility in terms of their education. I think if I try to sort of answer that question, in schools generally, I think it's really important that as teachers and as school leaders, we have that regular communications or lines of communications with parents about expectations and having high standards and making sure that they hold their children to account, in terms of what's expected, and not settling for mediocre. And some parents do really find that quite difficult, because there's often issues at home, and in terms of has this child got the right space to study. This is based on my experience of what I've seen. Has this child got a laptop, to be able to access their homework and do their homework? Have they got a space at home? Do they have access to support, if they get stuck with homework? And is there someone there who can help them? So if the answer to all those questions are yes, and there's no issues, and children are not performing and they're not doing what they're meant to be doing, I think we need to eyeball the parents, and say to the parents that they need to take responsibility for their child's education and making sure they're doing what they're meant to be doing. But also, some of the parents need, what I would call not parenting skills, because I won't be in a position to tell a parent how they should be raising their children, but how to set boundaries, and how to hold their children to account, and schools do need to have that conversation with parents. I'm not liked for it, but whenever I speak to parents, I say to parents that, look, I've got 5 children who are school age, and when my child comes home and says X, Y, and Z happened, or so and so said this to me, or this teacher said to me, I don't take their word for it. I find out the facts. And if I find out that my child is not doing what they're meant to be doing for school, whether it's their learning, whether it's their behavior, their attitude, or their conduct, I have that conversation with them, and I hold them to account. Often I've seen parents coming straight to school and say, my child has said so and so, and you're doing it, and it's usually not the case. So we do need to educate parents. We do need to give them a different perspective, and we do need to have the conversation with them to say to them that have a conversation with them and say to them, you should be doing things in a slightly different way. And sometimes it is awkward and it is difficult as a professional having that conversation with the parents. But sometimes we got to say to the parents, you should be leading the way. And where I work, I've got a really, really good family support worker who works with some of these families. But I think for us as professionals, as teachers in the front line, we sometimes have to pick up the phone and call these parents to a meeting if the children haven't got any excuse and they're not meeting our expectations. And we've got to be honest with the parents, I think.
Thank you, Omar. I love that. And actually, I wanted to put a question to both you and to Sarah. The Somali community. So I was reading a study, and obviously as a Somali also, I know that there is a high rate of unemployment in our communities. And correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah, but I think this is also the case in East London for Bangladeshi communities in Tower Hamlets, Newham, etc., in the past at least. And I wanted to ask you both, do you think that unemployment rates in both communities might play a hand in parental attitudes? Because one thing I also find really interesting in every school I've worked at, and also in every friend, every teacher friend that I have that I've supported with a Somali student, I find that they tend to say the same thing a lot of the time, which is that they have such kind parents who are like so different to their sons, and just wanted to ask, before I'll come back to you both, Bahja and Osman. I can see that you've requested to speak. I will come back to you both. But yeah, Omar and Sarah, just wanted to put that out there to you.
Go on, Sarah. You go first.
Okay, so I think the recent Joseph Rowntree report said that Bangladeshis in the UK earn 10 pence to the pound. And I think that really tells us a lot of what we need to know in terms of the kinds of the level, the skills, and the jobs that are being held by our community. And in a way, it's kind of to do with access and understanding. So I really agree wholeheartedly with Omar about like the difficult conversations that need to be had. But actually, one of the things that I think we're starting to do more in schools now, and I think we're kind of fumbling around in the dark a little bit about how best to do this, but it's also about educating and equipping our parents with the skills to be able to do those things. So so when we find out that the child does have a laptop, the child does have internet, my first question to the parent is that laptop in their bedroom, or is it on the dining table, or is it in the kitchen where you can see what they're doing? And also it's asking parents, and honestly it makes me squirm so much because I'm speaking to mothers and fathers who have children and I don't, but it's kind of asking the difficult questions around, are you prepared to also do the work? Because working with teenagers is immensely difficult. Raising them must be so much harder. And it's kind of, as school leaders, finding the right balance between empathy and understanding, but also trying to bring our parents with us on this whole educational journey to like create aspiration and to create a. I think that's something that I know I struggle with, but it's something that we as schools, I think, we're just still on the back foot of. So it's definitely all of those things that you mentioned, Yasmin, really play a key part in the reasons why. But in a way, I feel as though the reasons why are really important and important to understand. But now that as a school community, and I think the teaching community as a whole, like, will never disregard the impact that poverty and skill has on attainment. I think now where it's really time for us to start thinking about the next steps as how do we address that and how do we actually move beyond acknowledging that those things play a factor and are a massive obstruction. How do we change those things to ensure that actually it doesn't continue to be an obstruction in the years to come?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Sarah. I think you've made some really valuable points. But from a, I'm going to answer that question in a slightly different angle. As a parent, and also as a school leader as well, and as a teacher, and because it's sometimes I mean it's really really, especially in the modern era, it is really really challenging, bringing up kids, and also trying to have a career as well and to provide for these children. It is two competing factors, but you know the I don't think, I mean, you know, historically, poverty and attainment has been linked, you know, as factors that depend on one another. But from my experience of working in schools in Neum in the last 15 years, I genuinely do think some of these kids. I mean, I've seen so many kids and so many examples of kids who come from really, really poor background achieving so well. Okay, and I find that children who haven't had the luxuries and who haven't been brought up with a silver spoon in their mouth tend to work a lot harder than those kids who were brought up with luxuries. That's my experience because in Neum, I've seen kids that come from sort of families of sort of five or six or maybe seven or eight, and they're doing really, really well. They're doing really, really what they've experienced and what they've had is good, hardworking parents who've put them, who've given them the support that they need. And but the good thing is just trying to compare now, whether it's the Somali community, whether it's the Bangladeshi community, whether it's the sort of the other ethnic minority community. What I've seen now is a lot of those kids who sort of maybe sort of 10, 12, 13, 14 years ago were leaving schools with really poor GCSEs are actually doing really, really well because, standards have improved, schools have got better, there's a lot more support. And so, you know, you know, in essence, and I think poverty, you know, you know, can be a barrier to success if the children are not given the support that they need from home and the school. The school and the home need to work together. Parents need to make their number one priority as the kids, because if the sort of the upbringing when the children are young, if that is not handled with a lot of hard work and due care and attention, when the children get older, they will get into all those undesired attractions that are around them that can put them off track, I think.
I love that, honestly, both Omar and Sarah. Thank you both. Just stay there. I wanted to say, when I worked at the council, one thing I remember about Somali parents was a lot of them didn't actually realize, because I think schooling in Somali was different in the sense that if you were to fail your end of year exams, you would have to repeat the year. And so for the first time ever, at the time I was 21, I came across parents who thought their children were doing really well in school because they were progressing every year. So just because a child went from, year 9 to year 10 and then year 10 to year 11, they thought, okay, well, that means that they're doing really well at school. And often when it was too late, would then discover that actually their child is massively underperforming, and they sometimes had never attended. So like, this touches on both what you've both said, Omar and Sarah. Sometimes they wouldn't ever attend parents' evening and they wouldn't really engage with the school, often because they had a language barrier, or they didn't really understand, or that they had their suspicions of the school, or even sometimes thought that the school was doing well, or thought their student, their child, sorry, was doing well at school, because they were just going up every year because of age, and they didn't realize it had nothing to do with attainment. So Bahja, I'll come on to you in a second, but first I just want to tell you about John Catt Educational. This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. You can visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development. And I think that is also pinned at the top. So Bahja, did you have a question? Bahja, by the way, guys, is a teacher. She's been a long-serving teacher at a school in North London. She's been a head of year for very many years, and like you said earlier, Omar, she's also had quite challenging year groups. So Bahja,
Hi, I
over to you.
wanted to sort of touch upon about the underachievement and why they could possibly be underachieving. And I think it's also the lack of expectation, or the bar being so low for boys in general, but also Somali boys. I think even if you think in our classrooms, when a boy has a really nice presentation in a book, it's like, oh my God, it's amazing. And a girl, you just expect it from her. So I think in schools and also in some homes, the expectations for boys are quite low. And I've got, even currently I've got year 11s, and we're pushing through we're pushing through to get to the exam. And you've got the lower academic level of the boys. Well, my teacher doesn't think I'm going to pass. And you've got some teachers turning around saying that, I don't understand why you picked my subject, because you're not trying. So I think one of the reasons why they're underachieve is because they're allowed to underachieve, because we don't have much of a high expectations of them, and they don't have anything else to look at. Yes, the majority, I think, it has gotten better than previous times, because there's a lot more positive role models around, and there's like an entire other generation, and there's loads of professionals about that kids can actually have a conversation where they've got people, cousins and uncles and aunties, who are in professional jobs. Then maybe when I was growing up, or when we were growing up, we didn't have that. So it's a lot better. But I still think the level of expectations and the bar is still quite low for Somali boys in comparison to the Somali girls.
Thank you so much, Bahja. And, I think there are a lot of people that are listening that really agree with that. If there's anyone that wants to come up as a speaker, you're also more than welcome to share your experiences with us. Just, growing up Somali, I had a lot of friends who I knew, not just Somalis, but a lot of different ethnic minority groups, where there was a disparity between how boys and girls were treated. When I was growing up, my brother and I, my brother's 2 years older than me, we were treated exactly the same. Like, I remember we had the same chores. If he was allowed out, I was also allowed out, etc. But I do also remember when it came to things like accountability. So, if, one of us was going to be held accountable for what chores were done, say if my mum wasn't around, then I remember the responsibility would often fall on me, and my brother would kind of get off lightly. And I knew that was, the case for a lot of children in lots of different communities. So if there's anybody that wanted to share, I can see that I think it's Muna has come up to speak. Is there anything you wanted to say?
Oh, I saw that I got requested to speak. So I was listening into your conversation. So basically, I now work in Qatar, and I have noticed that I am struggling with imposter syndrome by being a young person, telling older members of staff things like deadlines. I do suffer from severe imposter syndrome. So what can I do to help battle it?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll pass it on to, I guess, the Somali head teacher.
Look, I think what my advice to you is, it Muna? Is that?
Is Munissa?
Munissa, good question. Look, I think what you need to do is you need to believe in your own ability, and you need to my dad always used to say to me when I was young, if you see someone doing something really bad, you've got to do something about it, and if you can't do anything about it, you have to hate it, like, within yourself, and like, and take yourself out the situation. What I would say to you in response to your question is, I think you have to believe in your own ability. You always have to, as a teacher, there's a responsibility, on us to make sure that, we are essentially, these children are under our care, and you as a teacher who's been entrusted in this very important role have to always give 100% of your effort into whatever that you're doing, whether it's delivering lesson, whether it's looking after a particular scheme of work, or etc. You have to I always used to say that, unless, before I left work in the evening, and I used to feel really bad unless I absolutely cleared all of my inbox, responded to all of my parents, etc., because I didn't want things hanging over my mind. So you have to believe in your own ability. Yeah, and if you see people not performing or not doing things that they're meant to be doing, you need to tell them and say, look, you're supposed to be doing X, Y, Z, you're not doing that, or you're not doing this to the best of your ability, and you have to call people out, whether you're a junior person or not. You have to be able to, call people out when they're not not doing what they're meant to be doing. And when I was an assistant head, I was line managed by a deputy head who wasn't great at the time, and this is my own experience. And I went up to the head teacher, and I said to the head teacher, I've got so many ideas. I want to do X, Y, and Z. I feel like I'm not getting anywhere because I wasn't being developed. I wasn't, I go to line management meetings, and I come up with X, Y, and Z. I want to do this. I want to implement this. And it was like, my line manager would always say, yeah, all right, leave it with me. Let me think about it. And a week goes past, and another week goes past. And eventually I got really frustrated. And I went up to the head teacher, and I said to the head teacher, look, can you line manage me? And he actually respected me for that, because I wanted to give so much more. I wanted to make so much improvement, but I felt like I wasn't getting anywhere because the person above me who was line managing me didn't have the same drive and push that I did. And the head teacher took me under his wing, and we had a really, really good relationship. So sometimes you have to push the boat, but within the professional boundary. And if you want to really improve things, you can. I genuinely think you can. So I think that's the answer to my question. Can I just? I think the previous person also made a really important point about boys and girls generally, which just from my own experience. I mean, I've got 3 boys, and I've got 2 girls, and I constantly, and I'm constantly, pushing my boys, chasing them for their homework, chasing them to do X, Y, and Z. And actually, for my 2 girls, I've actually never actually had the conversation with them and told them, right, get your homework out, sit on the table, do this. So it is something that is with boys, but hey, boys and girls are different. We mustn't give up on the boys. We need to also push them and give them that drive, because girls generally are more driven, they're more organized, but we need to also make sure our boys are also on that same wavelength as well.
Thank you so much, Omar, and thank you, Munissa, as well, for your question. If you have any more, you're welcome to just stay there as a speaker. And Omar, I completely agree with what you just said there, and I did want to touch on what Bahja said next, which is, why is there such a disparity between Somali girls and Somali boys? Like, it's not something that just happens at one school. It's something that's very common, especially in inner city London, where there have been studies. I know it's the case on an anecdotal level when I talk to a lot of my teacher friends. Why is there such a big disparity between Somali girls and boys? And that is open to any of you to answer.
Yasmin, I can't speak again. I can't speak for the Somali community, but I can speak for the Bangladeshi one. I think there are parallels. I feel as though, for myself as a Bangladeshi girl, the stakes were so much higher for girls. There was no flexibility, and I'm not saying that it's the same now. It's probably very, very different now. But when I was going to school, you either did really well and you succeeded academically, or no worries, it was fine, you can get married. And doing well at school was your passport to make sure that you didn't have to fall into that camp. And lots of my peers did get married and they were very happy and they have wonderful lives. But there definitely was a sense amongst myself and my friends that not achieving in school was not an option. And I guess we need to repackage that, because I think that was a really terrible mindset that our parents' generation had adopted at that time, and we all make jokes about it now. But we need to repackage that and sell it to our young people that not succeeding is not an option. And I think it's really hard as educators, because we in schools, we're always selling what I think is the myth of meritocracy. It's this whole idea of, if you work hard enough, you will definitely do well. But the statistics of what happens in the world argue directly against that. We just have to look at the number of young black men that are incarcerated, and we can look at the impact of racism in our society. We know that those things exist, and I guess it's striking the balance between shielding our young people from that and making sure that school is a bubble where they can feel meritocracy, but also reminding them that there is no other option other than to be brilliant. And I think somebody mentioned earlier about not having those low expectations, ensuring those high expectations are really, really consistent, because success is the only option.
I think the Somali society is a matriarchal society, and if you think about mothers are a lot harsher on their daughters, and then they're a lot softer on their sons, and fathers are a lot harsher on their sons than their daughters. And I think where the majority of households have got mainly the mothers are involved, while the mothers mainly involved in the kids' education, the mom is a lot more harsher on the daughter naturally, and the son is able to potentially sort of be able to sort of tell the mom, I'm doing all right, as long as he's at home, or as long as he's upstairs in his room on his computer, then he must be doing work. And I think where there isn't that much of a check-in on the Somali boys by the mothers, it allows them to fall through the crack. And where, like I said, in schools there might be lower expectations, when the parents find out it's too late, then it gets to year 11 and all of a sudden we're trying to sort of rush to get this minimum grade 4s when that child could have actually gotten grade 8 or 9 based on their potential in primary school.
Thank you both, Sarah and Bahja. I think what you both said has a lot of truth to it. I totally agree. And Sarah, I know that you're speaking about the Bangladeshi community, but as you said, there are a lot of parallels, and I think that a lot of what you said, does relate a lot to Somalis as well. And same with you, Bahja. Like, I think that's a really interesting take. If there's anyone that wants to contribute, wants to share their view, or wants to ask a question, you're more than welcome to come up as a speaker. So, Omar, I wanted to come back to you and to ask you a little bit about the statistics on Somalis, in the sense that my experience, and I'm often referring to before I was a teacher, because as a teacher, before this year, I was predominantly a classroom teacher, so I didn't actually have access to a lot of the detailed statistics or how they were collected about students. But before my time in teaching, when I worked at the council, I was really aware that the statistics on Somalis weren't really reliable. A lot of the time, the stats on Somali kids was masked by being lumped together with other African groups, or some schools didn't have an option for Somali, they just had the option for Black African, or a lot of parents actually wouldn't accurately record the ethnicity of their student or their child, because of their kind of reservations towards school and their views on things like institutional racism. So I just kind of wanted to ask you, because I know this will be listened to by parents after this recording ends, I just wanted to ask you, what would you say to Somali parents when it comes to, a school needing to keep accurate records on them? What advice would you give them, and why would you say it's important to have accurate records?
Yeah, look, my experience of this particular topic is quite interesting, actually, because just going through school data, I've seen Somali kids identified as Black African, Black British, Arab, others. Literally, they're in one particular scenario that I can think back to. They popped up in at least 6 different ethnicity groups, and the issue with that is when parents come in, as you said, and they fill out the admission form, they can tick whatever they want, and usually that's the record that the school keeps. And usually when you are doing, assessment forecast and you're looking at trends, one of the key indicators that you look at is certain things like free school meals, people premium, ethnicity. And if you then look at a particular ethnicity group, for example, the Somalis, and it's a very, very small population size, then you will treat those as outliers. And the travesty with that is because you've got them popping up in so many different sub groups, it becomes very, very difficult to draw trends or to be able to target particular ethnicities. So what I would say to parents is, I think it is really, really important that they, the record keeping and the recording of ethnicity is accurate, because it is important for schools to be able to draw trends. Because even at DFE level, ethnicity breakdown is really, really important. And what the DFE has done now, which is quite interesting, is that it's amalgamated quite a lot of those subgroups into 6 major ethnic groups for them to look at it from a strategic point of view. But still, I come back to the point that the importance of selecting the right ethnicity group, but also for parents to be able to engage with the school and ask the school questions about their children, and say to the school, what are they doing, for that particular ethnicity group, whether it's the Bengali, Pakistani, Somali. Parents should be able to, hold school to account in terms of what are they doing to support the children of any ethnic group that they are, concerned about. Because unless parents are asking these questions and unless parents are engaging with the school, some schools would gloss over, certain things. But if there are organizations or if there are particular parents or if there are particular forums who are engaging with the schools, and I know there are, and there's more and more these days, and holding the school to account and asking them difficult questions about, providing, saying to them, for example, the Bangladeshi community in Newham is a very substantial community. What is the school doing to support children who are underachieving? Do they know who those kids are? Or, for example, the Somali community. But the issue is, if the data is inaccurate and the data is misleading, those conversations can become quite challenging, I would say.
Yeah, Omar, honestly, I totally agree with you. Thank you for that. And I'm also going to read out what Fatima has said as a response to Bahja. She said, I agree with Bahja. I didn't realize how boys are raised. It impacts on how they perform at school. Boys are typically raised with very low expectations, and girls have to work a lot harder to receive praise. So it seems to be, a common thread in a lot of families and, across the Somali community, as well as other communities as well. And I think what you've said there, Omar, is really important. What you've touched on, that parents really need to be involved in school, or some important issues can get glossed over. I think to put just a bit more of a serious turn on that. Though I know this isn't common, I do sometimes still get contacted by parents in West London who've had difficult experiences with a school or with a child, and it's almost always a Somali boy. In the times I've dealt with exclusions, whether they're fixed term or permanent, I think in only 2 cases it was ever a Somali girl. It was always Somali boys. And I remember this time last year there was actually a case, obviously I won't say any names, won't say the school or the student, but it was a case of a boy who came home. He came home with burns on his eyebrows and the front of his hair and on the cuffs of his shirt, and he'd actually had an hour's detention after school. And when his mum asked him what happened, he said that he was told off for something that had happened in science, and that he was told off for something that had happened in science and therefore was kept for a detention after school. But his mum took him straight to the hospital, where they basically concluded he actually had burns. And when the school had actually not contacted the mum at all. And when the mum went to the school the next day, they basically overemphasized his behavior and said he was misbehaving. And that's essentially what happened. And, he was sanctioned immediately for this, as it was in their policy that students can be kept until X amount of time, etc. But what then transpired was another student had essentially recorded what had happened, and they'd been in the science practical where what the technician had, I'd seen the video. She'd essentially dumped all of these methane bubbles, which, as a lot of science teachers know, isn't actually a practical that the CLIAPS guidance recommends is done any longer. But she dumped loads of methane bubbles onto his arms, and then it was set alight. And rather than, because his hands weren't wet enough in the proper way, it actually burnt his arms and all the way up kind of to his face and his hair, just briefly, like it was a second, the flame, but obviously he still got burned. And rather than there being a first aid protocol where he's then sent to A&E or his parents are called, he was sanctioned and actually kept for longer than the school day. And when the mum shared this with the community, there was a lot of outrage. There were a lot of parents that wanted to go to the school, were demanding justice. I did get involved. I just kind of wrote a letter to the school. I couldn't actually attend the school as I was working in a school on the other end of London, but it was able to be resolved in a way where I am kind of I'm really against pylons where schools are kind of exposed on social media. I think the more appropriate thing to do is at the school and to speak to their head teacher and SLT directly, and to resolve an issue in a way that kind of works for everyone. But I think for me, I think it's a really common thing for parents to not be involved in the school enough, but when there is an issue involving a student in the wider community, a lot of parents, it does kind of spark this outrage, and understandably so, by the way. It's not something I'm against. I think it's something that's actually quite good. It does kind of spark this community feel where people want to stand up for the students in their community, and this kind of feeling that they are quite hard done by or victims of institutional racism. And I think the next point that I kind of wanted to touch on is, I think Somali kids in schools do face a bit of an identity crisis. I know that in Somalia, there was never a need for Somalis to identify as Black people. Everyone just identified as Somali. So the existence of, being like a race, I mean, anyone's welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this idea of belonging to a race started when moved to the UK. And I think what was I going to say? I think that's quite a big thing for a lot of Somali children, because when I was at school, people wouldn't really refer to me as black, even if I refer to myself as black. You know, people would say, "No, but you're a Mali. You know, you're Somali. You're not black." Whereas I felt that Somalis were still subject to the same kind of institutional racism and prejudice as other black people were. And at the same time, you know, being simultaneously Muslim, I think it's really common for Somali girls to be very overtly Muslim, in the sense that a lot of the time they wear a headscarf from a very young age, and so can be identified by anyone as a Muslim. So I kind of wanted to ask you guys, again, anyone in the audience and any of the speakers are welcome to take it on. What are your thoughts on the fact that Somalis fall into both groups? And Sarah, I guess this can apply to the Bangladeshi community as well. What are you guys' thoughts on ethnic minority groups that fall into, you know, an ethnic minority race, whether that's black or Asian, and also are visibly Muslim at the same time? Do you think that impacts the barriers that they face in either school or wider society?
I think.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. I mean, yeah, Yasmin, you've raised quite a lot of really important points there about sort of, you know, factors that that affect, you know, ethnic minority kids, whether they're Somalis or any other issues. But you are right in terms of Somalis generally. You know, first and foremost, you know, they're black, and then Muslim, and then they're Muslim, and you know, and that could be perceived as, you know, issues that, you know, that might become barriers. I genuinely do feel that we need to overcome that notion, and we do really need to think beyond that. Because even comparing now to when I was growing up in the 90s, the country has moved on, and there are opportunities. I genuinely do feel that whether if you're black or Asian or Somali or mixed race, if you genuinely believe in your ability, and you work hard, you will get the opportunities and you will get the breaks. If I can become a head teacher, anyone else can. So I think the moral in the argument is that yes, there will be barriers, but there will be barriers everywhere. But you also need to make sure that you work hard. And I think what we need to instill in our young people is that, in life you will face challenges, but the one way to overcome these challenges is to work hard and to make sure that nothing's going to come to you, on your lap. You need to work hard, and you need to be determined, and you need to be ambitious, and you need to put the effort in order to be able to reap the benefit at a later stage. That's what I would say.
Thank you, Omar. Bahja, Sarah, either of you?
I think being growing up Somali now and growing up Somali when we were growing up is two different things. I think when we were growing up, it wasn't cool to be Somali, and like you were either you weren't black enough, or there was that divide between black Caribbean and black African, and also Somali, and as well as also like a Somali, like I know my parents at times were like, you're Somali, but don't hang out with certain people because you might be brushed in a similar kind of way. But I think now there's a lot more. I could talk from North where I work. There's a lot of pride of being viewed as Somali, and I feel like when you are in an area where there's a large Somali population, you're just identified as Somali. Even in a tick box in our school, we've got a tick for Somali, because there is that large population. So you're not put into the category as Black British or Black Caribbean or Black African. You're put down as Black Somali. So I don't know about identity crisis. I think there is a disconnect between the parents and the students being cultural and like being a Londoner or being more Western than the parents, and moving away from like traditional kind of ways and cultural kind of ways. And I think that's where the identity crisis come along, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Bahja. Go on, Sarah.
I think the idea around identity and the role that identity plays in your sense of self and empowerment is really critical. I think, there's so much research that goes to show like a sense of pride in oneself can foster like confidence and self-esteem in a way that not much else can. So I think there's a role here that schools can play around the celebration of identities and community. And like I really like what Basha was saying about how it's there's a sense of pride, and I think schools can also play a role in celebrating that pride. And I think something that we have in schools is a bit of a culture of fear around, we're a non we're a particular school, we don't want to have any sort of partisanship towards any particular community. But I think actually success in building that self-esteem and confidence in young people requires schools to be braver in embracing the wonderful communities that we work with, but embracing those cultural communities and the religious communities, and really being sort of like a bastion for like cultural diversity in the community. And in my school we've got lots of different communities, but we most recently last year did something that was a culture day, and all schools are always super hesitant when it comes to uniform days. I can understand why, because of the impact on behaviour. But I think that when Culture Day happened, it was actually really magic. Like, kids felt so proud coming in to show off their cultural dress and talking about it. I mean, the biggest criticism we received from young people was the fact that we don't just want to wear our clothes, we want to talk about our communities. And the sense that pride exists is something that if we as schools can tap into, that's when I think we can actually do something really meaningful around bringing communities with us. Because we've talked a lot about how we communicate with parents, but I think we need to like step away from telling parents and teaching parents and saying to parents, this is what you need to do, X, Y, and Z. But having those difficult conversations, but also bringing those communities into school to bring them with us, in making kids feel good about themselves.
Thank you, Sarah. Honestly, I love that. And I was actually thinking that just before you said it. So I used to work at the same school as Sarah Sawa. And last year, like, Culture Day is one of my best memories. There were, for the Somalis amongst us, there were Somali kids I don't even teach. I didn't even know that were coming up to my school for a whole week before it saying, Miss, are you going to come to school in a dira? Like, are you going to wear it? And I thought, you know what? I can't let our people down. I was the only female Somali teacher in the school. And you know what? I came into school in a dira. So many children, wanted to take photos. It was such a lovely day. I saw the children in such a different light. I learned so much about their communities. The children were so proud, and I loved it. And I thought back to my own school days. I went to a predominantly white school, and I thought if there was a culture day, would I have come to school in a dira? And I honestly think I wouldn't have. I don't think I would have done it. I don't think I'd kind of grown up with that same confidence in my culture kind of instilled in me at that time, at that particular age. So it was so nice to see the experiences that the children in Newham got to have. So I totally agree with what you're saying, Sarah. And I'm just before I move on to the next speaker, just want to remind you guys about John Catt Educational. Remember, the show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. You can visit joncatbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles. I can see that a head teacher has requested to speak. Is there anything you wanted to share? I'll pass over to you.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me, Yasmin?
I can.
Brilliant, thank you. Just to say, I've been listening, and I actually wanted to just listen at first, but the discussions were so amazing that I wanted to come up and speak. So I am of Somali heritage as well, and I'm a head teacher in a primary school in Tower Hamlets. So I love the discussion today, and I think there's so many things that were said today that I probably won't echo, but I wanted to emphasize, I live by the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. And I think it's so important that, all the stakeholders, the families that we serve, the children, the school, we all work together ultimately to support our pupils to kind of progress. And I know the topic that we're discussing today is very much around why do Somali boys underachieve, and I think Beha just said this earlier, but I cannot emphasize how important maintaining high expectations is key, but also similarly building those positive relationships. And when I think about, I grew up in the borough that I now am a head in, and I was a child once, and it is, there are many challenges that we all face in education, and I think building positive relationships is really, really important. And within our community, I think there is this notion around boys, and particularly around they have to be tough and they don't show emotion, and and it's and actually they do need to, and it is really, really important to build positive relationships with the boys. I've got 3 children, and my eldest is 16 years old, and every day I'm getting to know a different I'm learning something different about him as he's growing up. And actually I think, as Umar said, being a parent as well as an educator, actually you see both sides, and you get to see actually how challenging it is when you're raising your children, and then similarly thinking about the communities that you serve, how you want to make sure that you also make that difference. Now I do want to give some advice, because I think Yasmin said earlier about there might be some parents that are also on here, but I think these are advices that I live by as well as a parent. So when I go to my children's parents' evenings as well, or if I go to the school, these are things that I look for. So I do hope you kind of find this helpful. I do think if you come from a household where there is mum and dad, I think it's really, really important that any meeting that you go to within the school, that you both attend, because there's something really powerful, and you actually take your child or children, because there's something quite powerful and empowering when you all go together, that actually means that you've taken the time, it's really important, and you want to celebrate their achievements, regardless of how big or how small it is. I think that's really, really important. I also do think that, attending meetings isn't just, parents' evening normally is like once a term. But I do think that attending a meeting once a term isn't sometimes enough. And so therefore, if, for example, your child is underachieving, or they're not making the progress that is expected, that actually you do have those regular meetings that you do attend, because then it shows your child that you want them to do really well, and you care about their learning, but also it allows you the space to then think about what are they finding difficult, because we all find things difficult, and it's about how we then work together to support them with that. And I think for me, I go more, because obviously being an educator, I actually go more for my child than I do for the school, because I want my child to know that, we're there, and we kind of want to listen. I think the next thing that I want to talk about is around interests and enrichment. I know we're talking about achievement and academics, but actually something that I think is really, really important, particularly with the Somali community. Again, it might be the same for other communities, but it is around enrichment. And actually really, I know the phrase "get to know your child" is like, well, I do know my child, but we live in an era where, technology also raises our child with us. And actually, when I say get to know your child, it's about getting to know their interests, and actually finding out about what is it that they enjoy, what is it, because that will path this journey for what they want to aspire to be one day, and really getting to know what do they enjoy, what tickles them, what do they what activities do they like, and then exposing them to those activities where because cultural capital enrichment is so important for our children. and really, getting to know, like my eldest, he's 16 years old. When he was younger, he absolutely hated writing. I didn't push him to write. However, what I then did is try to find out what other sorts of things that he likes, and then I gave him this hook of writing for a real purpose, if that makes sense, rather than let's get your book out and let's just practice these grammar expectations, which to him, is he didn't enjoy. But I think, just really kind of that enrichment. I'm a real advocate for enrichment and like exposure to kind of clubs, activities, visits, because it's so, that this phrase that goes around a lot on social media around you can't be what you can't see, but actually that isn't just around the educators and the people that work with you. That is also to do with the aspirations. If you want to become a particular professional and you don't know a lot about it, or you don't know what the building steps are for it, I think it's it's really important to kind of expose them to that. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. Can I just thank you so much for that for various reasons? I think all the advice you gave there is so valuable, and I know that everybody, listening to this, is able to hear that and will relate to and agree with a lot of the threads of what you said. And I do also want to say, when I started this about an hour and a half ago, I didn't actually know, I had not come across any other teachers that were Somali, and that's what really stood out to me. I know Omar said, I asked him, are you the only Somali head teacher? And he said no, I'm sure there are more. So it's really nice in the same session to have come across another Somali head teacher who's working in the area that they grew up in. I think that's really, really inspiring. And so I wanted to put a question to you both, so to you and to Omar, for everyone that's listening who might be a teacher, what advice would you give to Somali teachers who are in any stage, whether they're starting out, whether they're in middle or senior leadership? What advice would you give to Somali teachers in schools?
And it's a good question, Yasmin. I think any advice that I would give to anyone who is starting sort of their teaching career would be to say, look, really need to believe in yourself. And I think being in this particular profession is a noble one, because you have a direct impact on on children's lives, and you're shaping their future. So what I would say is, do your research, work really hard, put the effort in, but also to be ambitious. I think being ambitious is really important, and not just to settle for a classroom teacher. Obviously, it does take a bit of time to sort of move up the ladder, but have the ambition that sort of 10, 12, 13 years time, you will also become a head teacher, not to just limit yourself to a middle leader or a classroom teacher, but also at the same time, in order for that to happen, you have to put the effort in, and the hard work. And if you do put the effort and the hard work in to your profession, and anything you do in life, you will reap the benefits. So for example, I've never done the same role for more than 3 years, because A, I was good at what I did, but B, I also worked really hard, and as a result, I reap the benefits of promotion. And if someone said to me, when I first started teaching, that you'll become a head teacher one day, I didn't. I would tell them that that they must be joking and they need to wake up from their dream. But once I sort of recognized my ability, and once I recognized that actually, if I work really hard, I will get the opportunities that I deserve, then I really started believing in that. And success and promotion will come to you if you work hard and you put the effort in, I would say.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I'll go on. Go ahead.
No,
Go ahead.
I
I was
agree.
just.
I was actually giggling as Omar was speaking because I completely agree with everything that he said. I think it is hard, and I think Omar would agree. Like, it's not, being a head is a very hard job, and it does take hard work to get to it, but it's possible. You know, thinking about my journey through to headship, I think number one, what I would say is being in an environment that allows you to grow is really crucial. I think you hear, lots of kind of stories where I've got lots of, friends who really want to progress, but they're unfortunately in environments where they don't see that potential, or they don't have the capacity to grow. I think it's really hard. So I think being in that environment where you have the space to grow is really key. I think echoing what Omar said around really developing your pedagogy and practice. So within the roles, I found it really beneficial. I love to use the word shadowing a lot. And the nice thing about when I used to shadow is I'm not actually in that post. And so therefore I'm shadowing somebody, but I'm kind of learning on the spot as well. And so sometimes when you apply for a position, then you are accountable for ensuring that you complete that role to your best, because ultimately you're being paid for that position, and you have to make sure that you follow things through. However, I found shadowing really helpful, because I would then say, can I shadow somebody, or I'm really interested in this area, can I shadow so and so? And it meant that I was learning lots of things, and so therefore when it came to doing the position, I was ready to do that position, because I think there's nothing more demoralizing than applying for a position and then you don't get it, and then you're told, oh, you didn't get it because of A, B, and C. But actually using the opportunity to shadow somebody within that role means that you're picking up things and you're working on yourself. And I think the third thing I would say is probably feedback. Be open to take feedback. Whether you agree with it or not, it will always make you develop your confidence, but as well as seeing from another perspective how you can do better. So if you apply for a position and you don't get it, go back and ask for feedback and say, right, what is it that I was missing? What do I need to work on? But similarly, asking the school, how can you support me to ensure that I get better at these areas? So I think, but requesting feedback, can you come in and see how I do that? Can I show you this? How would you say that I could do this better? And just being open to that, I think is really key.
Thank you. Could I just ask what your name is?
Harder. Yes.
Harder, thank you so much. So we're actually coming to the end now, and I will need to draw this to a close. But I can see that there is an autism group that have sent through a really, really important question about a lot of Somali children having undiagnosed needs. So I'm thinking now, guys, 2 Sundays from now, to just do a part 2 and maybe focus on things like unmet needs and things like that in the Somali community. I think that would be a lovely topic. But for now, I really, really want to thank you also. Thank you so much, Omar, for all of your contributions and for agreeing to be a guest today. Same with you, Hoda. It's so lovely to meet you. I didn't know that there was a Somali head teacher in a primary school just in the adjacent borough from me. So that's been really nice and inspiring to learn. Thank you so much also to Sarah Sawa and to Bahja. I think I mentioned this earlier, but Sarah Sawa and I used to work together, and she was like my biggest icon and role model in teaching. And Bahja also a very, very good friend of mine who I've learned a lot from in teaching. So thank you to everyone that's listened, to Fatima and to everyone else who sent through questions. So we'll do a part 2 on this 2 weeks from now, and so I will share everything on my Twitter again. And thank you so much to our speakers and to everyone that's listened, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.